Chapter 76. 7 Blood Eyes 2. On the other side of the mountain range, under the setting sun, 7 mountain peaks are extremely conspicuous. This was especially so for the 7 giant tide statues. The fluctuations they emitted seemed to be able to connect to the sky, causing the sky to form a huge vortex in the area of the 7 mountain peaks. Within the vortex, there were clouds surrounding it, and there seemed to be some gigantic ferocious beast within. As it moved about, it revealed a sense of divinity that intimidated all directions. This scene caused Xu Qing's heart to tremble. It was only after the person in front of him finished his inspection and left with the jade slip that was given out that Xu Qing took a deep breath and retracted his gaze. "Show me your travel pass and answer why you're here." In front of Xu Qing, there was a table with 2 people sitting behind it, a man and a woman. The man was very handsome and wore a gray robe. At this moment, his eyes were closed as though he was resting, but the spirit energy fluctuations from his body were very strong. The woman was also wearing a gray Taoist robe. She wasn't old and looked to be around 18 or 19 years old. Her small face was exquisite and her skin was fair. Her eyes were very spirited, like starlight. It was very easy for one to be immersed and unable to extricate themselves. The person who spoke to Xu Qing was that woman. She lifted her head and cast a glance at Xu Qing, not caring about the dirt on his body and face. She had seen too many scavengers like Xu Qing here. As she spoke, she casually took out a jade slip as though she was waiting for an answer and recording it. Xu Qing sensed the spirit energy fluctuations in the other party's body. The fluctuations weren't strong, but for some reason, they gave him a very clear sense of danger. However, he weighed the pros and cons and felt that if it was a life and death battle, he had the confidence to kill the other party. Hence, he calmly took out the token from his leather pouch and handed it over. A hint of surprise appeared in the woman's eyes. She took the token and inspected it. When she returned it to Xu Qing, her expression was no longer cold. Instead, she cast a deep glance at him. "So you're a junior brother who wants to join the sect. I wish you joy in the 7 blood eyes." The other party's words were a little strange. Xu Qing took the token and glanced at the jade slip in the other party's hand. "You don't need an ordinary person's contribution jade slip here. Just take the token. This is your qualification. Also, let me remind you that you have to complete the entry test as soon as possible, and adapt to the life of the 7 blood eyes as soon as possible." After saying that, the woman ignored Xu Qing. Xu Qing was deep in thought. After he left the examination area, he noticed that the people in the queue behind him were looking at him with envy. This made Xu Qing lower his head and take a deep look at the token in his hand. After he left, the man beside the woman opened his eyes and smiled. "Why are you suddenly so kind-hearted?" and even went to remind a newbie. "He has the token of my 7th peak. Although it's white, it's hard to say what will happen in the future. A word of blessing and reminder won't cost me any contribution points, but once this person rises, it can be considered good karma." The woman calmly spoke and called the next person over for inspection. "How can there be so many futures? One look and I can tell that this person is a scavenger. With the white token, I don't think he will have much luck. It's still a no if he can pass the entrance test and obtain the status of a disciple. Even if he does, he will have to pay 30 spirit coins a day, as well as expensive cultivation resources. I'm betting that he won't be able to hold on for 2 months. He will either be expelled or die with a bang." The man raised his hand and clenched it into a fist, then quickly stretched it out and gestured. Their voices were very soft, so Xu Qing, who had walked far away, didn't hear them. At this moment, he had already left the teleportation zone and entered the city. As he walked in, waves of emotion slowly stirred in Xu Qing's heart. What greeted his eyes was unprecedented prosperity and luxury. Under the afterglow, any building here was as gorgeous as the city lord's residence in his previous city. The green bricks and green plants that could be seen everywhere also made this place abnormally tidy. There were even more people in the city. There was an endless stream of people and everyone's clothes were very clean. Most of them were made of silk and it was rare for them to wear hemp. However, their expressions were cold and they seemed to be in a hurry. At that moment, the sun was about to set and the lights of thousands of houses on both sides of the street could be seen. Under the illumination of the light, the brightness of the land didn't seem any different from during the day. Only the houses were very quiet, and not a single sound could be heard. On a small river in the distance, there was a small boat. On it was a woman wearing a doused robe and a veil. She was currently throwing medicinal pills into the river, causing countless fish to circle around it. They would occasionally jump up, creating ripples in the afterglow. Many young men on the shore jumped into the river and fought with the fish for the medicinal pills. It was very strange. All of this caused Xu Qing to feel both unfamiliar and wary. He felt that this city was different from the scavenger campsite. It was also different from the small city where he had lived in the slums back then. However, there was also something similar. On the streets of this city, Xu Qing would always smell a hint of a familiar scent. This smell was very light. If it wasn't for Xu Qing being used to the slums and scavenger camps, it would be very difficult for him to smell it so keenly. It was the smell of blood, the same as in the slums and scavenger camps. A long time later, Xu Qing cast a deep glance at the city as the wariness in his heart deepened. As he pondered, he walked on the road. He didn't walk to the center of the road but to the darker edges. This was Xu Qing's habit. At that moment, he was preparing to find an inn to rest. The stench of blood here made him not wish to stay on the streets. As for the source of the blood, Xu Qing didn't wish to find out either. He knew that what he needed to do now was to complete the entry test as soon as possible, and enter the 7 blood eyes to alleviate the diamond sex pursuit. At that moment, in the dusk, the afterglow of the setting sun slowly dimmed. Xu Qing, who had yet to find a suitable place, looked at his surroundings as his gaze gradually turned sharp. As the sky gradually darkened, the entire city became increasingly quiet. The people on the streets also quickened their pace as the sky darkened. Among the thousands of households, although there were still lights, the gates of every household were closed and it was deathly silent inside. This was the case for the residences and shops. Only a few were still open but there were no customers inside. When the last rays of the setting sun disappeared in the distance, the entire street was empty. All of this caused Xu Qing to squint his eyes. He quickly walked a few steps in the dark and surveyed his surroundings, searching for an inn. Time flowed by and after the time it takes for an incense stick to burn out, Xu Qing finally saw an inn that was open from afar. He was about to head over when he suddenly looked into the distance. On the dark and empty street, in the distance, a figure was fleeing rapidly. 7 to 8 burly men were chasing after her with sinister smiles on their faces. "You want to run? Let me see where you can run to. It's been a long time since I've seen someone with such guts." To think that she actually dared to make a move on the contributor we have our eyes on. Xu Qing's cold gaze swept over. The person fleeing in front was a woman. She seemed to be injured and her footsteps were a little unsteady. Under her disheveled hair, one could barely see a fierce-looking face. Xu Qing retracted his gaze. This matter had nothing to do with him, so he didn't bother with it and walked toward the inn that had opened for business. At the same time, the fleeing woman also saw Xu Qing. Her eyes flickered slightly as she suddenly spoke loudly. "I've obtained the contribution points. Why are you still waiting here for help? Hurry up and escape." A cold light gathered in Xu Qing's eyes as he looked at the woman who had spoken such clumsy words. Being swept by Xu Qing's gaze, the woman couldn't help but shiver. She felt as though her entire body had been plunged into winter. Her eyes narrowed and her heart pounded violently. Cold sweat broke out on her back and the intense sense of danger even surpassed the pursuit of the people behind her. She knew that the situation was bad but she couldn't take back her words. She could only grit her teeth and flee in another direction.